Our friend Dahlia Lithwick joins us now. She's a senior editor at Slate Magazine. She writes about the courts. She's the host of their Amicus podcast. Dahlia, I want you to tell me if I have said anything wrong thus far, and I want you to tell me what you're thinking.
No, I think you've said it right. I think Josh used swing for the fences, and this is both a swing for the fences in terms of Justice Alito's rhetoric and language. As you noted, this is not a milquetoast opinion. This is just going for broke. It's also a swing for the fences in terms of the way this happened. We have never, ever, ever seen a 98-page draft opinion or heard about deliberations, who's writing dissents. Every piece of this, Rachel, is astonishing, and you almost can't let the one astonishing thing, which is the substance of this draft opinion, overmaster the other astonishing thing, which is that I guess all bets are off now at the court, and norms and traditions that have stood intact for centuries, if not for decades, are gone. And now we just leak opinions.
Well, let me ask you about the substance of that, because I think a lot of Americans hearing this news right now, maybe even watching the show right now, are gobsmacked by the revelation that, yeah, we might have heard it was coming, we might have heard the warnings, but this means that the government's going to force women to give birth now. This is going to make abortion illegal in most of the country, in much of the country instantly, and potentially in all of the country soon. I think most people are very gobsmacked by that. But I think you rightfully point out that this means something important in terms of the rule of law, in terms of our system of government. We've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And the judicial branch is headed by the Supreme Court, which is a self-governing institution, which does not have external ethics rules, for example, that apply to them. The justices police themselves. They set their own mores and traditions. It's a somewhat secretive body. It's certainly a very small one. It's the smallest of all branches. If, like you say, all bets are off and draft opinions get leaked now, and the procedural shock that we've got tonight also takes hold, what's consequential about that to us as Americans?
I mean, I just think this is a last bastion of how the court, as you said, polices itself. I mean, we did not see leaked drafts in Bush v. Gore. We did not see leaked drafts in the first Obamacare. I mean, not in Heller. It's just not done. We certainly heard whispers occasionally, but even that, I think, was never reliable. And so when you're getting, as I think it's important to say, this is a first draft, and it's important to think of that as sort of a first bid, right? This is presumably going to get honed and refined. People may be put off by some of the sharp language in here. This is clearly Justice Alito giving a little something to Justice Barrett, giving her the sort of safe haven concerns she had about dropping babies off at fire stations, the eugenics claims, that those are very near and dear to Justice Thomas's heart. So he's dumped it all in here, and presumably not all of the justices. We, again, don't know what Chief Justice Roberts is thinking. There's a huge John Roberts shaped hole in this draft opinion. But I think this presumably gets buffed down somewhat. But I think that if it is in fact the case that the long-standing norm governing how clerks conduct themselves and justices conduct themselves, which is that we don't have leaks at the U.S. Supreme Court, if that's gone, then it's really, really very hard to see what other rules they will be using to conduct themselves, because this is just, as you said, a gobsmacking turn of events. And it's very, very clear to me that it's not just the leak, that people are talking, and that this is clearly being done, we don't know by who, to either soften the blow or kind of inflate the blow of what's coming in June. And so it's, I think, being done for purely political reasons, which also goes to your question about rule of law. A court that cares about its appearance as an institution that is above politics just threw caution to the wind and made a determination to do the most brazen political act that I've ever seen.
I keep thinking about recent article that was published about the kind of new right and what's happening in terms of like eccentric right-wing sort of fascist-friendly billionaire Peter Thiel funding new kinds of Republican candidates. So thinking about that article recently in The Atlantic and the moment where J.D. Vance, whose Ohio Senate primary is tomorrow, is speaking on a podcast, talking about what kind of politician he wants to be, why he wants to join the Senate. And he says, at one point, he says that part of the reason he wants Trump to run again and win again in 2024 is that he thinks that if Trump gets in there, he should fire every single federal government employee in the entire country and just fire them all at once. And he acknowledges that there are legal protections for a lot of people in those jobs. And so that sort of a mass firing, which has been a right-wing fantasy for a long time, that would be illegal. And J.D. Vance sort of speculates that, and of course that would go to the courts and it would get to the Supreme Court and they'd rule against him. But then he should pull on Andrew Jackson and just say, well, the Chief Justice has made his ruling. Now let him enforce it. And that is, again, like sort of a right-wing, man on a white horse fantasy about the kind of government and the kind of governing that they want. But it also shows that the court isn't in a safe position from the right now. And it's, I think, come under really serious scrutiny from the left in terms of the ethics issues surrounding particular Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas and his wife, and her involvement in political issues related to cases before her husband and the court. The legitimacy of the court isn't just an academic thing. It's a question as to whether or not their rulings are followed. And if they're not, they don't have an army. They don't have a police force to implement these things. It does feel like this gets us closer to that edge, too. Is that fair?
Well, Rachel, the court started this term, the first Monday of October, with the lowest approval ratings since Gallup has been polling, right? So depending on the poll, it was the high 30s, the low 40s. I know that seems astronomically high compared to other branches of government, but it's catastrophically low for the court, and it's dropped substantially in a really compressed amount of time. And I think the thing we have to think about is that when Justice Alito or Justice Gorsuch or Justice Barrett say, oh, don't criticize the court because you're undermining the legitimacy of the court. And when you hear the court say, don't impose ethics rules and standards on us, don't force us to have meaningful recusal rules. What they're saying is don't criticize the court because you're undermining the court. And I think your point here is so important, which is that the court is undermining the court, whether it's the shadow docket, as you said, the ethics violations, whether it's reaching out to take cases that are not before it. There's a whole litany of things that the court has done in a really short amount of time that is horrifying objectively to anybody who cares about the court. And maybe I would just end with this because I think it's really important. There is a non-trivial chance that the 2024 election goes to the court. And the idea that progressives and Democrats want to undermine the court because they want the court to come down with a decision we can all ignore is chilling. Because as I've said many times, there's no plan B if we ignore the court. Plan B is the army. It's not good. And so we want to have a court that has neither the purse nor the sword, right? That's the Federalist Papers, but that has public respect and regard. And when the court itself is really working very, very hard to undermine that, it's awfully hard to say that this is anything other than A, a self-inflicted wound, and B, a self-inflicted wound that is going to redound to the benefit of absolutely nobody when the rubber hits the road and we need a legitimate court.
Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor at Slate Magazine. Thank you for your time tonight, Dahlia, as we continue to respond to this breaking news. I know it's hard to talk about something while we are still absorbing it, and none of us had time to read 98 pages of this opinion, let alone the 30-something page appendix before getting on the air. Thank you for helping us as we're learning it.
Thanks, Rachel.